1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike blows to my body. I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. This is the last piece of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. And in it, Paul uses the example that would have been very common in the days. He uses the image of an Olympic. He uses the image of an Olympic athlete. Nearby in Corinth, they had the not nearby, but in Corinth, they had the Isthmian Games, which were the second greatest sporting event after the Olympics. And so the idea of the professional athlete and what goes into training for that, by this point, is very familiar. We've only brought back the Olympics for 100 or so years, and we're very familiar with the picture. But in their age, the Olympics were already 600 years old, which meant that this was something that not only the Greeks understood well, it was something that everybody in the Greco-Roman world understood well. That there are these athletes that got together every 2 years to compete at the highest possible levels. And that's what he uses for his example as he closes out chapter 9. He's been talking about giving up his rights for the sake of others. And now we're going to see what role discipline plays in all of that. So, our first kind of section goes, where I think it goes is from 24 to 25, halfway through 25. The next section, I believe, starts halfway through 25 and goes down to right here, the end of 25. And then the third section, I believe, goes from 26 to the end. And I'll show you why. That's how I kind of break up this passage as we move through it. So it begins with a question. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? So it's easy to understand this sentence, right? In a race, all runners run, but only one gets the prize. So all is being compared to one for the prize. If you want the prize, you got to run better than everybody else, right? And it's easy to misinterpret this, misapply this. Everybody thinks that somehow this example is an example of the Christian life. Like we're all Christians, but only one Christian gets the prize at the end. That's not Paul's point. Paul is using this first section, 24, to set up, this part sets up the second half of 24. So we get the command, which is run, and we get a little modification, in such a way. What is this way, Paul? What is this way that you want us to run? Run as to get the prize. So what Paul is saying in the first verse, 24, he's giving us a command, run as to get the prize. And so in a race, obviously you run the best that you possibly can. And that's, well, if you want the prize anyway, you run the best that you possibly can. That's Paul's point. If you want to get the prize, you're going to need to run at the very best of your ability. And that's his kind of instruction to the Corinthian church. And then he unpacks this a little further. He says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Now, I know that seems very connected to this next part, to get the crown that will last. And it is. But I think the strict training refers primarily back actually to the prize. I know grammatically it doesn't connect that way, but in terms of subject, it does. Because what this has to do with is the conduct, the intensity, and the discipline that it takes to get the prize. See, you can go into a race and run as hard as you can as if you want to get the prize. But when Paul says run in such a way as to get the prize, it's not just what you do on race day that matters. It also refers to the strict training. And that's really what Paul is getting to in this example. He wants the Corinthians to understand that if you're going to finish the Christian life out well, there's some discipline involved in this. Some strict training, some saying no to yourself. And when it comes to Christian freedom, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to say no to ourselves. But Paul's point is actually sometimes you need to say no to yourself. And when so up here, when he says run, and he gives us this command, and he says do it in such a way as to get the prize. So we get this modification of in such a way. What is the way? I think the answer is both run to get the prize, run as one who wants to get the prize, and also the strict training that goes into this competition. Everything that, all of this, 24 to the end of halfway through 25, I think is talking about the way we run. That's what we're seeing in this first part. In the second part, he gets to motivation. And we have a better motivation than the world in terms of a race. They do it. They is the those who compete in the games. They do it to get a crown. So we do get a reason for why they compete. They get a crown that will not last. The crown, they had two words in Greek for crown. One of them was like a temporary wreath that they gave to athletes, the victor's crown, and then there was a king's crown. And this is the one for the victor in the athletic games. And it was a wreath made of perishable, plants and twigs and things like that. And they did not last. But so this 2 is important. So it's motivation, I don't believe just for the training. The motivation, I believe, applies to all of this first section. But anyways, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. And so this crown that will last forever is being compared to the crown that will not last. And what Paul is saying, that we have a better goal, a better motivation. We have more reason than these athletes who go into strict training, right? Think about the strict training that an athlete goes into. They're doing all that for a crown that won't last. Not us. We have a crown that's going to last forever. So the question becomes, how much more? How much more should we train powerfully? And so in the second half of 25, we have the greater motivation or goal. And then in 26 to 27, we get, and you could kind of break this into 2 if you want. In fact, let's do that. Let's break it into 2. That'll make it clearer. So we'll make 4 sections. And we'll go right here. So in this one, Paul gets to his example, 26 through 27, right here. And Paul's example is much like in the beginning of 24 and 25, or 24, when he was like, the way we run. Now this could be like the way that Paul runs. So there's a correlation here. And so it begins with the word therefore. And what's interesting is that the therefore doesn't really build so much on what came before it. It really brings us more into what's coming next. It's more of a connective like so then sort of a thing, not like therefore I'm building a firm foundation of what I just said before and I'm building on that point. He's kind of continuing his point. He says, therefore I do not run like someone running aimlessly. So here's an example number one. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. So this is he uses two examples, example one and example two. Someone running aimlessly is even if they exert themselves to the highest possible degree, they will not get to the finish line. And a boxer beating the air, right? This is shadow boxing. That's great. But if you never are able to land blows on your opponent, then you're not going to win. So it's not that, training by running or training by beating the air is the problem here. Paul is making the point that that's not how he runs his race. That's not how he fights his fight. Because this is not going to get him the goal that he's trying to achieve, which is this crown that's going to last forever. He says, no, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave. So this right here, striking a blow to my body, is being compared to, right over here, one who beats the air. So Paul's like, if I'm going to throw a punch, I'm not going to just throw it at the air. I'm going to throw a punch at my body. I'm going to fight not my imaginary foe, not do some shadow boxing. I'm going to fight my real biggest enemy in this race, which is my own flesh, my body. I'm going to make my flesh, which wants to put itself first, my slave. And that's Paul's example. So that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. This last line, disqualified for the prize, is easy to misinterpret as well. Paul's mind here is not that he will make it to heaven and lose his prize. Paul's fear is that he won't be in heaven at all. When we look at how Paul talks about being disqualified and many other places in the New Testament, what we discover is that Paul's fear is falling away from the Lord. Paul's fear is not being faithful to the end. Paul's fear is that he would have preached the gospel to others, that they would become saved, but that he himself would fall away from the Lord. And so Paul sees himself as one who must run to get the prize, as one who must train strictly in order to prevent this from happening. The preaching to others, this is part of running the race well, and it's also what guards him against becoming disqualified for the prize. And we can, in our context, we're so focused on the concept that God. What's the concept? Yes, once saved, always saved. Once saved, always saved. And we don't consider what we need to do in order to hang on to our salvation. This is true. Once saved, always saved is true. And there are times in the Christian life when this is what we need to make it through the day. Sometimes this is exactly what we need to make it through the day. But in the context of 1 Corinthians 9, this is not what the Corinthians need to hear. Right here, this is not the message that they need to hear. The message that they need to hear is, you guys have to understand that your embracing of Christian freedom, your constant putting yourself before other people, the lack of discipline with which you run the race, this leads not to seeing the Lord one day. This is the behavior. This is the pattern of one who will one day be disqualified. This is how people live who one day are going to walk away from the faith. And what we tell someone who is living that way selfishly in sin, not following the Lord, is not, hey brother, once saved, always saved. Don't be afraid. You're good to go. What we remind those people is that even Paul, has a fear of being disqualified for the prize. He's not so arrogant as to think that he can make it to the finish line without work. No, we're not going to get to the finish line simply because God carried us all the way there and we were lazy our entire Christian lives. No, no, no. Those who see heaven and have really been transformed by the gospel really believe it. They work out their salvation. They don't earn their salvation, but because of their salvation, they work out. They are disciplined. They train hard. They live for the kingdom of heaven. That's the point of this text. And so what it does for us kind of reflectively at the end is it makes us wonder about our own conduct. Do we want as one who wants to get the prize? Do we do all of the strict training that God intends us to? Are we seeking that crown that lasts forever? And do we see the other side of things as, if I don't, I may very well abandon Jesus Christ one day? It's what this text is trying to get across to us. So the 4 sections would be the way we run, greater motivation, goal, Paul's example, and this last one, greater loss. Not winning, and we have a greater motivation, but we also have a greater loss, and then we have the way we run and Paul's example, and there's kind of a parallel here in this text, and causes us to just be reflective on ourselves. So that's 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27.